Hello, welcome to Lichter Filmfest. With me and far away at the same time is Matthew Rankin, the director of the 20th Century, a very interesting position on Canadian politics. Matthew, what the hell did you think while doing that film?
Well, it's a strange movie. It's a mutant biopic. It takes place in Toronto in 1899, and it's about the youth of William Lyon Mackenzie King, who was the Prime Minister of Canada longer than anyone else for almost 22 years. I describe it as a nightmare that he might have had in 1899. It's not so much a straight biopic. It's more of a reprocessing of the events of his life through a kind of oniric prism. And it's very weird. People will be, likely a little weirded out by it. And it's funny and it's strange. And my feeling about it is that it also has something to say about how we're living now, the world we live in now.
On the one hand, he may have been the most powerful man in Canada. And on the other hand, he has this very weird diaries.
Myself, I'm a lifelong diarist. I write in a journal compulsively, as did Mackenzie King. And I read his journal as a young man. Later on in life, he became a very obsessive pet owner, and he did conduct seances to communicate with the ghost of his mother and others. He was sort of obsessed with ectoplasm and this kind of stuff. I don't really get into that. That all happened kind of later in his life. This is more of a Genesis story. It's about his early romantic failings and his sort of Napoleonic quest for power. But what I find really interesting about Mackenzie King is I feel like, and this is where I feel like his story is sort of some international significance above and beyond the context of Canada, is what it reveals about power and what we do with power. I think political power is something, and we see this today, it's something that can mobilize the very worst expression of ourselves or the very best. And I think Mackenzie King was someone who walked a very fine line between these two. And he represents what I would describe as the radical center. He was sort of a kind of fanatical moderation, somewhere between utopia and slapstick, somewhere between, the most idealized version of what we're capable of as a human species and the very worst expression that we're capable of. He walks somewhere between those two. And I think there's one poet who said something to the effect that he will always be remembered wherever we honor the most compromised version of ourselves. So, and I feel like that's something we're dealing with now. It's something that I think about a lot, actually, is the center, like the political center, the power center. It's a space that is less and less untenable because the ideological elastic is sort of stretching to its breaking point. We're seeing that right now, right? And, whatever space that the center occupies, you could think of this as you could think of it as a very democratic space. The idea that, in a society, we have many different points of view and we have to find some point of compromise. And compromise could be a willingness to listen to other people, to acknowledge that there's many legitimate options in a democratic society. Or we could see it as this very opportunistic space where people are just chipping away at everything that has value, to the point that the power they represent is utterly meaningless, and it's just about preserving their own political longevity. I think Mackenzie King ultimately falls into that second category. Do
you think one can find political despotism in the center as well?
Well, I think there's a tyranny. There can be a tyranny to the center, certainly. Yeah, it can be a space that can become immovable. And I think certainly in Canada, and I think this is true of other liberal democracies, the center can be such a large tent that it cannot really, you can be tyrannized by its own meaninglessness. I think certainly Mackenzie King, having been so successful with precisely that approach to politics, it's a recipe that subsequent politicians have copied.
If you focus at an individuum, how this individuum is dealing with power, there is a shifting point where the power or responsibility given with it is overwhelming. I saw that somehow with William as well. Did you plan to show that, or does it come with the story itself?
I think his greatest goal in life was ultimately to gratify his mother. So I think that was intensely meaningful for him. It was everything that he knew and everything he had been groomed for. So it was the natural. It was kind of his, it was that for which he existed. But, when you make a movie, of course, these are all like kind of abstract ideas. But when you make a movie, I think most of the time we're responding to something personal. There's some personal reason why we're making this, right? And for me, it was very much a personal connection with him. And what I liked about him was, yes, he was, he did have this sort of public identity, which was very dignified, very officious, very official, very protocolaire. But within himself, he was this, writhing hornet's nest of obsessive pathologies and self-doubt and deep lonesomeness. The thing that I relate, what I sort of love most about Mackenzie King was his lonesomeness. I think that a lot of his political expression actually emerged out of that, out of a sense of loneliness.
These early cinema aesthetics, does it come from your experience as an animation filmmaker, or why did you choose that?
I'm trying to play with artifice. This film definitely falls into that tradition. And part of that is for two reasons. One is I had a small budget to work with, and if I tried to imitate a credible, authentic, realistic period piece, if I tried to, even aspire to that with, Spielbergian gloss and period sets and so forth, I knew that my money would run out within a matter of days. So I knew that if I made everything fake, if I took a more theatrical approach, a more metaphoric approach to the spaces, then I could build all my sets and, so part of that was making an aesthetic virtue out of my small budget. But the reason that I really went ahead with that approach fundamentally was part of the historical argument of the piece. The film is about nation building and sort of creating images of nationhood and these structures of identity that we set up, that we, these stories we tell ourselves, these, national narratives that we create, these ideas of destiny and this kind of stuff. I really wanted the viewer to be constantly confronted by the artificiality of that. I wanted, this idea of Canada, and, when I say Canada, it could stand in for any nation state. I really wanted the viewer to be confronted by how this national project is an almost architectural structure being grafted artificially upon the earth by human effort, right? There's nothing organic about it. There's nothing, even remotely related to human evolution. It's something that's a story that we have invented that we tell each other. So I wanted the visual world to kind of incarnate that idea. So the whole film is like that. Most of it takes place outside, but the outside world is extremely fake, almost artificial, almost architectural.
Thank you very much for this nice little talk on power and Canadian film industry.
Such a great time. Thank you.